Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome an accomplished and senior professional from Pune, India, Mr. Harish Bhamidipati. Harish, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Ashutosh. Heard a lot of episodes and heard a lot about you. So it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here and looking
Thank
forward
you.
to this
Thank
conversation.
you so much. Thank you. Harish is the co-founder of Align by Design, dedicated to empowering leaders and organizations through strategic alignment. He's also co-founded Choose to Think, a boutique agency focused on helping individuals and teams cultivate future relevance through entrepreneurship and the pursuit of excellence. He's also a co-author of a book titled Hope is Not a Strategy. So, Harish, we're going to talk about strategy and alignment today. But before we get there, tell me about your own journey in brief and what got you interested in entrepreneurship and strategy.
Yeah. So I did my engineering from Pune, College of Engineering Pune, then did my MBA from MDI Gurgaon. Then I was working with various IT product and services companies, Infosys, BMC Software, Cognizant. So my better half, Sirisha, who's also appeared on this podcast.
Correct.
It used to start when we were expecting our first child. We used to go for a walk, and both being MBAs, right? So there's some itch about thinking about various business ideas or what is wrong with other organizations.
Yeah.
So that's how the whole entrepreneurial bug sort of got in. And 2010 is when I started my first company. It was an online book library service where companies would outsource their entire library function to us. Then 2014 is when I started Choose to Think with Ramanan. The idea was to use content and how we can use it for learning, because we have benefited so much from learning. So how can we actually take that to people, and with a specific objective of future relevance? And then we thought of doing it for companies as well.
Mm.
We would work with companies on building culture of entrepreneurship, innovation,
Yeah.
pursuit of excellence. Around this time, Sirisha was, working with SME founders on building, the kind of culture that they want to build in their company.
Mm.
So I said it makes sense for us to sort of join forces, and that's how Align by Design happened.
Amazing. And as they say, the rest is history.
That's-
Wonderful. So, Harish, let's talk about strategy and alignment. How do you define strategic alignment and why is it so critical? Why is it so critical for success?
Yeah. So, strategic alignment, the way we define it is not having any think, say, do gaps, right? A lot of times, what we see is leaders at the top have a vision about where they want to take the company,
Mm.
how they want to take the company. It's all in the mind. They've thought through it. In some cases, not so well thought through, but they have some strategy. And if you just look at how strategy is defined. Strategy is a set of choices that you want to make.
Mm.
Where do you want to play? What is going to be your USP? What are the core competencies that you want to build, and all of that. But it's a set
Mm.
of choices. And
Mm.
when it's a set of choices, there is some trade-off, right? So all of this has to happen first in the minds of the leaders. And then that needs to be communicated to the rest of the organization, almost like a rallying cry. Everyone needs to understand, believe in that yes, this is something which we can do, and then the actual execution of that strategy.
Mm.
So when this is not happening in sync, that's where we see that that there is a think, say, do gap. So that's how we define strategic alignment. The opposite of this is strategic alignment,
Mm.
where everything needs to be in sync. Everyone needs to understand where they fit into that larger jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
And when I say where it could be as an individual, it could be as a role, it could be as a function. You
Mm.
all need to know where you fit into the entire picture.
Fascinating. And based on the work that you've done with so many organizations, what are some of the most common pitfalls you have observed that organizations face when trying to implement new strategies?
Right. I think, couple of big challenges or pitfalls that I see is sometimes the strategy is not thought through.
Mm.
There is lack of believability in the strategy.
Mm.
A lot of people feel that, oh, the CEO just, got up from his sleep or her sleep and, just decided that we will do X,
Absolutely.
Y, Z.
Absolutely.
And people don't have that sense of belief that, oh, this is something which is doable
Mm.
and we can actually do it.
Mm.
I'm not saying that everyone should be thinking only incremental and you should never think, revolutionary and transformational. That is not the point. The point is
Right.
not spending enough time to get everyone to believe in that cause. And this is sometimes it's a problem of not thinking through with the strategy, and sometimes it's a lack of good communication of
Mm.
the strategy, right?
Right.
Because and sometimes even if you're communicating well, because the underlying tenets of trust is missing,
Mm.
I feel, oh, this person is giving me this whole gyan about
Mm.
strategy right now, but he's going to just flip over, he's just going to change the whole thing
Mm.
when something new comes up. We have run after so many shiny things in the past.
Mm.
So this a thinking through, building that believability, and b communicating and
Mm.
getting everyone to sort of be part of this. I think the third part of doing is fairly easy and simple. It's a very well
Mm.
known solved problem.
Mm.
So many tools and
Very interesting.
frameworks for that.
Very
Uh,
interesting.
uh,
You also
yeah.
use a term called future relevance.
Yes.
So I want to ask you, how does future relevance tie into effective strategy building?
Yeah, yeah. So again, if you just look at future relevance, right? What we are saying is you need to be relevant in the future.
Correct.
So there are multiple components to it. One is you keep adding to your knowledge in terms of new frameworks. That doesn't mean you ignore the timeless principles because there's some things which are going to be relevant. You can't be, like I said, you can't be running after the new shiny object every time. So one is understanding and assimilating how the world is changing.
Mm.
Be getting your hands dirty with some small experiments that you keep doing all the time. It could be changing mindsets. It could be actually learning a new skill, some kind of learning agility that you need to have.
Mm.
Uh, Telling the whole world that this is what I have learned. So it's not just about you knowing something, but I don't know that you know it. Then people are not going to place their faith and trust in you. And then being ready to actually adapt. That's how you will be relevant in the future.
Right.
So it's a continuous process.
Mm.
And when we're talking about strategy, again, it's about thinking in these small experiments because the rate of change in the world is so high now that
Mm.
you may want to come up with some very cast in stone strategies, but
Mm.
the world doesn't allow you that
Correct.
luxury anymore.
Correct. Well said. Well said. So my next question is, that it's often been spoken that Drucker said culture eats strategy for breakfast, though I don't think he said it. And I did
Yeah.
speak to a few people who are close to him. But my question is, for a similar kind of a topic, what would you say is the relationship between culture and strategy?
Yeah, yeah. So culture, again, the way we define it is simply the way people behave when nobody is watching.
Correct.
There are a lot of definitions of culture. We feel this is the simplest one and easy to
Absolutely.
understand
Mm.
and absorb, right? So whenever it comes to implementation of any strategy, when it comes to execution, unfortunately, human beings don't have APIs, right? How programs talk to each other.
Correct.
So I need to have that whole faith and trust in you, your capabilities, that you are, there is a sense of kinship between us
Mm.
and, the value that you bring to the table. I need to understand that.
Mm.
For that, we need to have that sense of, kinship and that culture. And I need to know how you are going to behave in this situation.
Mm.
And this sense of culture is intangible, of course, but
Mm.
there are tangible constructs that can be used. It could be these rituals, the way I expect you to behave. We are in a podcast, so there is a certain
Mm.
SOP that is there, even if you have not actually told me that upfront.
Correct.
I expect some ways in which you're going to behave, right?
Right.
And when you're talking about a company and organization, so many different divisions, so many different people, then I need to have that sense of culture that yes, we all belong to the same culture, right?
Mm.
And that culture is going to be like a boundary. There are going to be a lot of quirky things that you keep doing inside the boundary, which
Mm.
is what tells me that, oh, you and I are part of the same, culture, because we do the same quirky things,
Correct.
which an outsider may feel, oh, this is so stupid.
Mm.
Why are they doing it this way?
Mm.
And not having this, sense of culture is what will actually leave me having, doubts about how you're going to behave. If this is a situation that we are faced with,
Mm.
are you going to optimize for X? Will I be optimizing for Y? So this is what leads paralysis of action, not having trust, and then the eventual result is that the strategy is not being executed.
Mm.
Just go down to the root of it. It is this, not being part of the same culture. And again, you must have noticed that I've just defined culture as is. I'm not saying what is good culture, what
Correct.
is bad culture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yet, based on all my past experience, culture, while it is important in an organization, given the fact that we come from different backgrounds, different geographies, and now with global companies, we come from different countries. How do cultural differences in global teams impact strategic alignment, and how can these be managed?
Yeah, yeah. Very, very good question, Ashutosh, because there are certain ways of thinking that come naturally to you because of,
Right.
your geography and, the way you've been brought up, right?
Yeah.
Thinking. Give good example that I keep giving is this. After the 2023 World Cup, there was a photo of Mitchell Marsh actually having his leg on top of the World Cup trophy.
Yeah.
So that would seem completely different
I
or
agree.
disrespectful for Indians,
Mm.
but it was not that he was trying to disrespect the trophy. I mean, he also believes that it's a fruit of a lot of labor that they all
Correct.
put in.
Mm.
That's the difference between cultures, right?
Mm.
So if you want to be part of something, you will need to define the tenets of how that group works, right? And that is extremely important. So people then need to know that, okay, this is, if I'm part of a team,
Mm.
irrespective of where I come from, this team works in this way, this team
Mm.
operates in this way, this team behaves in this way.
Mm.
Unless you define that very clearly, I'm going to come in and I'm going to default to whatever has worked for me in the past,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And when you're talking about global companies, you're talking of companies or cultures where there are different ways of operating, thinking. Maybe people from the eastern side of the world will
Correct.
not be that candid, whereas and these are standard tropes, right?
Mm.
That Americans are going to be a lot more candid, and it's not like they're being disrespectful,
Yeah.
but then that becomes a clash of civilizations.
Correct.
So you need to define, okay, you might be coming from Japan, you might be coming from US, you might be coming from India, but
Mm.
this organization is going to work this way.
Mm.
And then it's the choice of these three people to decide whether, okay, if this is what this organization is going to be like, is this what I'm ready to change
Mm.
to? If not, it's much easier for me to take that call saying, no, this is against my way of thinking, so I'm not going to be able to operate here. But
Great.
if you don't define that, then you are making the mistake of letting these three people come in with their own
Absolutely.
defaults, and
Mm.
that's where then this just mess happens.
Absolutely. Great response. And Harish, what role does storytelling play in shaping and communicating culture?
Yeah, I think storytelling is probably the biggest way in which culture has been defined and propagated, not just now but for ages, right? We today when we think of culture and when we're talking about rituals, and you have a Slack and a Microsoft Teams channel to talk about stories, you have videos to make, podcasts, to talk about different stories. But if you think of it, for years together, culture has been propagated even when there was no social media, no written text, right?
Yeah.
How? It was all through stories. You look at every religion, they all have some holy book and there are stories. What are the stories all about? They're basically telling you the prescribed way of living, right? How does a Ramayana and a Mahabharata tell you that, oh, there are stories?
Correct.
You would otherwise remember those epics and those principles that you have to behave in this way.
Yeah.
You will remember those stories, and then you feel that, oh, if Ram was in this situation or if Krishna was in this situation, that's what they did. So I think this is how I should behave. Right? So stories are a great way of propagating ideas, especially when they are abstract ideas like how to behave. So when you're talking about defining a culture in a company, unless you have stories, it's all just very theoretical lecture that this is how you should behave. But unless you give me stories, I'm not going to be able to understand.
Well said. Well said. How do you help or support leaders to navigate dilemmas that impact strategy and culture?
Right. Yeah. So we've written this book, as you mentioned, Hope is Not a Strategy. It's around the dilemmas resolution framework. And the one principle behind the DRF is that no one comes in to sabotage a company.
Correct.
When they come in, like we spoke earlier, you're not sure how to behave here. And in the absence of a prescribed way from your side, I'm going to default to what has worked for me in the past, which could be in my previous organization, or maybe how my family thought, how my teacher recommended that I should behave. Right now, think of 50 people coming in like this, and everyone doing the same thing. So the reason for that is when they come in, there are a lot of choices that people need to make. When the choice is between a good and a bad option, almost everyone takes the good option.
Right.
But when there are equal options, that's where it's a dilemma. And when you are going to optimize for something, when you're going to prioritize for it, by definition, it means that something else is going to suffer. Right. So when we start working with companies, when they come up with we have companies who will say that this is our strategy, right? So we help them first think through that have you thought about the dilemmas that are at work here? So you want to be innovative. Fine, great. Nobody's going to say, I don't want to be innovative. But then does that mean you are also okay with failure? Because if there is no failure, you can't be innovative.
Correct.
So what is it that what is your acceptable rate of failure? And are you really going to actually, walk the talk where you are celebrating failures? But otherwise, what's going to happen is I will ask you, Ashutosh, go and innovate. You go try something, and something fails, and then keep castigating you for the rest of your life. Ashutosh, you tried that, it didn't work, it didn't work, it didn't work.
Correct.
You feel completely discouraged, right?
Correct.
And others are also going to see this happening. They are also not going to be doing anything different. And by nature, when you're trying something different, some things are going to fail, right?
Correct.
So this is how we first start get these people at the highest level to start thinking through the strategy in terms of understanding these dilemmas and then making peace with the fact that there are trade-offs. And this is what is acceptable to me. So we start with that, and then it's about the communication, and then aligning your operations, teams, what their incentives, all those things need to fall in place. Otherwise, again, it's like that orchestra where one guy is playing one instrument excellent, but the others are not in sync.
Well said. And what, in your view, is the role of leadership and governance to ensure strategy and culture is effective?
Yeah. So again, whatever you say, leaders have a disproportionate influence on the role on the rest of the company, right? So if you are saying that, I want my company to be innovative, and I want them to be learning all the time. The first question that I ask these CEOs is, okay, what are you doing differently? What is the last new thing that you learned, and did you actually tell that to people? That I learned this. Over the weekend, I tried to code, or I did something with ChatGPT. Give me that story again, right? that this is how I am trying to be innovative, or this is how I am trying to learn. The minute the leaders model this behavior, it's much easier for people to understand, oh, this is what is expected from me in this organization, right? So when we are talking about culture and strategy, leaders have to start modeling the behavior that they espouse or they ask others to exhibit. It has to start from there, and then it's about this governance as well, right? Now, as the CEO is saying, yes, yes, I'm trying all these different things. I'm talking about that in the town hall. So people are going ahead and actually trying something of their own. But if the middle manager says, no, no, all this is fine, I want this to be done tomorrow. I don't care whether you try a different approach, but this has to be done tomorrow. So then that's where the governance also comes in, because the CEO needs to understand how these one-on-ones are happening. What are these people being measured against?
Yeah.
What is the mentoring that they're getting from the middle managers?
Correct.
So this is just sort of, I'm trying to give an example which explains how this leadership and governance plays such an important role. So then you think through, different aspects, whatever the strategy may be. Giving these examples was easy for me. So I came up with the example.
Absolutely.
But,
great example.
Yeah.
Great example. So Harish, I have time for two more questions.
Yes.
In today's world of technology, generative AI, and there's so much happening in all our lives. How do you see technology influencing strategy and culture?
Yeah, again, I keep telling CEOs that you have to think of your team as now a hybrid of humans plus agents, right? Like in the Matrix movie, you need to have both, because it's a reality whether you accept it or not. So you might as well just assume that we are going to have, so people are going to have co-workers who are not humans. Like I was saying, humans don't have APIs, but here your agent is going to have an API. But even there, you are the one who has to define the vision. You may take help of some agent or chat GPT to actually make sure that there are no blind spots that you are missing. What are the second, third order effects of you saying that, oh, this is the kind of company we want to build, and all of that. But you have to come up with that vision, because technology, chat GPT or any generative AI, everything is at the execution level, right? But before execution, you have to actually think of what you want to do. And the next part is, do you desire that, right? A lot of things can be done, but you don't go and do all of those things, right? You do the things which you want, you are aligned to, you are subscribing to that worldview. So defining that vision, and be figuring out whether that's what you want to do, and the entire change management to embrace this change of working with technology is extremely important. If you don't fix that, then you have, instead of 10 people, now you have 10 people and 500 agents, which can give you 10,000x of productivity. But all get towards what, right? That direction is still something which, at least in the near future, is something which we still need to think about ourselves.
Very well said. And my last question to you, Harish, with such vast experience that you have, the fact that you've got two organizations aligned by design and choose to think, and you're an author, what would you say are some of the valuable lessons you have learned to align strategy and culture?
I think one thing that is that's been a revelation for me over the last few years has been not to ignore the role of emotions, right? I read about this analogy in a book called Switch by the Heath brothers, where they talk about this analogy of an elephant and the rider, right? Where they say that the rider is the rational part of the brain. Will do a lot of calculation. The elephant is like the emotional side, where they can really move mountains, but can really change directions randomly, not thinking through where to go, right, which mountain to move. And that's why both need to work in tandem. to actually, harness the power that you have. So when you think about aligning strategy, when you think about organizations, I might be generalizing here, but a lot of times engineers tend to think very rationally and logically all the time, right? It's like they're talking to programs where they're saying, okay, this is what needs to be done. So there, the maximum capacity that you can have is 100%, right? Machines cannot go beyond 100%, but humans can. And that comes from the power of emotion and, really getting excited by something. So if you can combine these two in whatever you are trying to do, I think you can create magic. And this is something which I have been, I have not done a good job of in the past. But now that I understand the power of this, I keep looking at how we can combine both in whatever we are doing, what our clients are doing.
Fantastic. And on that note, and your last point of the importance of the role of emotions, which are so critical in both strategy and culture. Thank you, Harish, for speaking to me about your own journey. I think we covered a lot of very interesting ground on strategy and culture. What is strategic alignments? We spoke of some common pitfalls organizations face. You spoke to me about future relevance, about the relationship between culture and strategy. We spoke about culture in global teams. We spoke about storytelling. You also spoke to us about governance and technology. Thank you
Yeah,
for speaking to me and good luck to you.
sure. Thanks a lot, Ashutosh. This is a great time that I had.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.